great. It's 7:02 PM, and I am calling the May 30th, 2023 Planning Board meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded. Our first order of business is roll call, so when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Pat Norton,
Present.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, present.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, present.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Rick Mitchell,
Rick Mitchell, present.
Matt Hamel,
Matt Hamill, present.
Marnie Crouch, present. And Beth Herr, are you on Zoom? Beth Herr is not present. So our first item on the agenda is an update on where we stand with respect to amendments to the general town stormwater management bylaw. That's chapter 29 of our general bylaws, and potential concomitant amendments to our rules and regulations. So Town Council Alex Wishart is with us, and Pat Norton has been spearheading our efforts. So if, I don't know which one of you would like to spearhead the update, but please let us, give us a brief overview of where we stand on these amendments and what you recommend for going forward.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, can you all hear me fine?
If you could speak up a bit or turn your volume up, that might be good for
Sure.
everyone.
So I'm happy to defer to Pat on giving a summary of the updates if he would like. I think he put together a presentation that he had emailed earlier today. So Pat, if you're comfortable with that, go for it. If not, I'm happy to go through it too.
No problem. It would take me 1 second. Oh boy, maybe longer than that. I don't have the, Alex, is there any way that you can share the presentation that I had sent on your screen? You should have that. I'm not in on the Zoom on my computer.
Let's see. I don't know that I can because I'm outside of my office, so I don't have
It's no problem. It's
access to, sorry.
It's not essential. I just wanted to make sure I captured an introduction that represented the scope of the effort that was requested. And it began with a photo taken this weekend from Bridge Street up the hill to one of the construction sites. As a remembrance.
That's one here.
Okay. And then basically just to say what the ask was, right? To update the definitions. There's two definitions we were meant to update. And that was the one related to the common plan development and also how we spoke about scope. And another was to incorporate the administrative land disturbance permit requirements, which were kind of above and beyond the state mandated stormwater permit requirements of disturbance of not less than an acre and all the other things that we already spoke about previously. And the other one was a reference, there was a request that we specifically made reference to the definition in the handbook, meaning volume 1 and 2, and the priorities of in the outline of volume 2. So which we tried to incorporate, and that's what the update, Alex, I had maybe plugged in. I'm not sure I did it in the right location, but
Yeah, no, you did, Pat. That's excellent. Thank you for adding that.
and then lastly, to update the enforcement section 12 to refer back to all the updates in the previous section 4 updates that Alex had performed. So I believe in the proposed updates you have in front of you, those minimum requirements were met. And we could maybe talk about those now. I don't know if Alex wants to spearhead that.
Well, could I just interject with respect to the enforcement provisions?
Yes.
Because it seemed to me that they did not reference the land land disturbance permit requirements for much smaller amounts of land. Let me see if I can find the exact. Here it is.
Page 64.
Yes, so administrative land disturbance review is required if the disturbance of land is between 5,000 square feet and a half an acre. So it didn't seem that there was an enforcement provision tied to that. It didn't seem to me that there was an enforcement provision tied to the common plan of development or sale, and that the enforcement provision retained the language with respect to a land disturbance of an acre or more. So that was my primary concern. I know others might have questions about the definition of slope, but my first reaction was whether the enforcement provision, that would be on page 64, section 12, is broad enough in scope.
I would concur with that. That's troublesome. That needs to be fixed.
So the concern is about adding a reference to the administrative approval?
Right.
It's making sure that that whole section applies to any deviation from what's a much more complicated set of criteria in the applicability.
Right, so section 4 and section 12 have to knit together really well. And right now, they don't.
Well, I'm wondering if that isn't covered under applicability, because it says.
Well, it is, but so, for example, Rick, if someone failed to get their didn't engage in an administrative land disturbance review, and there was a disturbance of much less than an acre, what's the penalty for that? There's no direct language in section
Right,
12.
all it says now is the penalty applies if you disturbing more than an acre
Right.
and you didn't go through the process. Well, that's not what section 4 says.
Right,
There's
disconnect.
definitely a disconnect.
Okay, well, I can make an explicit reference to the administrative approval. I do think that the language in 12A at this point is probably broad enough to cover that, but we can make it more explicit. That's
Oh,
fine.
the more explicit, the better. We don't want any
Yeah.
wiggle room at all here. I mean, that's really the goal, particularly because a stormwater management permit, the way the language reads now, is by majority vote, not two-thirds. So it's, I won't say it's easy to get such a permit, but the vote requirement is such that something could slip through the cracks, and we know what happens when something slips through the cracks. We see that picture right in front of
I
us.
mean, right, section 12 says a violation is only applicable for a disturbance of 1 acre or more,
Right,
whereas in fact, a violation should be applicable to the whole range of size categories that are set up in section 4.
right.
Well, it
So-
really would be easily dealt with by getting rid of equal or greater than 1 acre of land.
And say something like all the provisions of section 4.
Any
Yeah, yeah.
deviation from section 4
That's right.
triggers the enforcement action.
So we're talking about, yeah.
Not to get overly complicated, you can really cover that by getting rid of the 1 acre reference. And it says, shall constitute a violation of this bylaw, and it's implicit.
No, you'd have to say something like, a disturbance of earth contrary to that authorized in section 4.
No, you can put it in, but it's implicit in it says.
I think that's actually very, very important, because section 4 is
It
quite,
has not been applied for, granted, a disturbance of earth shall constitute a violation of this bylaw. I mean, if you want to put it in, that's fine.
Well, we can let Alex wordsmith on that. So
Yeah, I can figure,
I think that's.
I can sync those two sections up. That's
Yes,
not a
and,
problem.
you know, I'm a big proponent of clarity the more explicit something is, the less room for error there is. I mean, even a good faith mistake. If it's explicit, you know, there can be no misunderstanding. The other thing, it seems clear to me that if we go forward with these amendments to the general bylaw, we more than likely do have to amend the rules and regulations so that the bylaw and the rules and regulations conform. And I do know that some of the definitions in the rules and regulations don't match precisely with the definitions in the general bylaw. So that should be addressed, and I don't know whether the general bylaw could refer to the definitions in the rules and regulations or vice versa, but they should match.
I think you're jumping
Agreed.
to an opportunity maybe in the next steps was to update the rules and regulations, because I don't even think today they really tie in well together.
Right,
Right, I think that's important.
right.
Because they refer to small projects and large projects in the rules and
Right.
regulations, but that's not really described.
That's not the
to-
nomenclature that's used in the bylaw.
That's right.
Yeah, you gotta be, yeah.
Right, and Alex, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the planning board can amend the general bylaw by vote, but we do need public hearings to go forward with any amendments to the rules and regulations.
So that was a clarity on the question asked. We should update that rules and regulations document to
Yeah,
conform and be in alignment with
yes.
the bylaw.
Does everyone agree with that? It makes perfect sense to me, at any
Yeah.
rate.
It's a good
Yes,
opportunity to
yes.
clean it up right now.
Yep.
Even what you said with the definitions not all matching and things like that.
So the definitions in the regs need to match the definitions in the bylaw. And the bylaw needs to be implemented before the regulations can be amended. So, yeah, I think step one is we should get everyone on board with the version of the bylaw we're looking at. And then, you know, once that's ready, Pat and I can work on updating the regulations to make sure that they align with the bylaw.
And would you be able to do that and complete those tasks sometime in the middle of the summer so that we could have a public hearing on the rules and regulation before town meeting?
Certainly, yeah,
Well,
that's
would
doable.
those rules and regulations, they don't have to be adopted at town meeting, do they? They can be adopted by the planning board
Correct.
after public hearings?
Correct.
Oh, okay, so we're not.
Although
and-
I should caution that depending on the scope of well, yeah, I'll have to give some thought to whether we wait until after town meeting to do the vote on the regulations.
Well, procedurally, that's how you would do it.
Yeah, procedurally, I think that's how we need to do it. So step one, yeah, but we can certainly have a good draft ready to go through the public hearing process shortly after town meeting. I think that should be the goal.
Right, but just to clarify, the rules and regulations do not get voted on at town meeting.
No, those get voted on after 14 days public notice.
Right. Okay, so we don't
Public
have to
hearing
vote.
before the board.
Right, okay.
But the bylaw should be amended before the amended regulations are
Right,
voted
right.
on.
Of course.
And
Okay,
just so everyone's, that some towns do have a separate land disturbance permit application from the stormwater rules and regs, and that application process is different in some, but I think for simplicity we're planning to use the same.
right,
Yeah.
right, of course.
Okay.
That sounds good.
So
Does it-
enforcement, you had some comments on enforcement, I think I captured.
Right.
Better reference and tying into section 4. Were there any other, Alex did a really good job cleaning up some grammar outside of the scope I had outlined earlier, but
I have a question on the definitions under common plan of development. There were sale. In the first sentence, a contiguous, and I think it should be contiguous land area, where multiple separate and distinct development or redevelopment activities. And the one that stands out, and I have a question on, is have occurred. If somebody has proceeded and has a building permit and has constructed a edifice or whatever they're doing, and then this comes back to be enforced, I'm wondering if you aren't really, I'm thinking that they would be grandfathered in. You can't sort of go back with a pencil and eraser and say, well, you did it, and you did it according to the rules and regs, but now we're coming back and saying you didn't do it right.
I don't think these would be retroactive.
Well, that's what it says. It says have occurred. So to me.
I think what's meant there is after this bylaw is in effect, if somebody comes along and does something that after the fact is contrary to the bylaw, we can make them tear it down, or we can make them adjust it.
That's not what it says. And what it says, it's just a very broad statement, have occurred. So who knows what the time limit is on that? Could be, somebody could say, well, 2 years ago, they finished that project, and they got all the permits, and they were done, but we have a problem with it. And so we're going to use this bylaw to retroactively go back and enforce.
I think as long as the bylaw was in effect at the time the actions occurred, it's probably state law that's...
That's different. If they were doing, it says in the next word, are occurring or are proposed. So yes, if they're doing it, if they just blew by, didn't get permitted, didn't go through this process, and they're doing it, then you certainly can stop them and say, wait a minute, you do not have a permit or permission to do this.
I understand what you're saying. So you could say have occurred after the date of the adoption of this bylaw.
Yeah, that would be good, fine. Okay.
That's much better. And one question under, I think it's applicability C, number 3. Any land disturbance on a lot of any size which has caused or can reasonably be expected to cause or contribute to a violation of state water quality standards. And this is the wording I'm questioning, or as deemed necessary by the permit authority. I'm wondering if that doesn't sort of give the permitting authority kind of a carte blanche that contradicts really this entire bylaw, because it sort of stands out to me and going, well, as deemed necessary by the permitting authority. Maybe I'm reading incorrectly, but I'm wondering why that wording is in there.
The last time this was discussed, there was an agreement, it was language taken directly from, I think, the handbook.
think the
or some
model.
definition.
Yeah, that's from the model bylaw.
From the-
Okay.
And it's common in some of the bylaws from other towns.
You had the same comment back in,
At least I'm
Back
being,
to
I'm being consistent. Okay. That's my only other comment.
Did anyone else have any comments about the definitions of slope and anything like that?
Yeah, I was looking at slope and, you crossed out the second sentence, the incline of a ground surface expressed as a ratio of horizontal distance to vertical distance. In the first, the difference between the highest point and the lowest point in elevation within disturbed land divided by the distance between 2 points. I mean, it seems a minor thing, but If you were to say, what is a handicap slope, what would you say? 1 and 12? Or 12 and 1?
Yeah, I get what you mean.
And I just wonder if, because it's actually the vertical distance divided by the horizontal, if you left the second sentence in there and just changed the ratio of vertical distance to horizontal, then it would,
And what section are you on?
definitions.
Definitions
slope,
of
slope.
Slope.
Okay.
Again, it's a minor thing, but there's a big difference between a 1 and 12 and a 12 and 1 slope.
Are you
But that
trying to-
would that change the nature of what,
No,
but that,
it
the
is,
application of slope in the document, would it change how you apply the bylaw, though? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Either way,
that's my question. Is it just clarifying,
would it change how you
The
required
intent.
a land disturbance permit?
is it clarifying the intent or changing the,
well, it says the elevation is divided by the distance between the 2 points, is the ratio.
The difference between
It's actually the
elevation and
The difference between a high point and a low point, yeah, the elevation, the difference
so you
between
were
a high
saying
and
it
low,
could be a negative,
divided by the distance. So it is actually,
negative 25% versus a positive 25%.
yeah, that's a minor thing. But
You never know when someone wants to mess with,
Algebra.
no, with a legal definition
Yeah.
to their advantage. So it's always good to make it as airtight as you can.
Yeah. I think we can, yeah, I understand what that means.
Do you have language to adjust that? Or could we just say,
you could leave the second sentence in, the incline of ground surface expressed as a ratio of,
how about leave the first sentence,
Vertical
take out
distance
the
to horizontal.
paragraph, put in a parentheses and put i.e., the incline of ground surface expressed as a ratio of horizontal distance to vertical distance. Does that solve it? You've essentially put two definitions in one.
I like the idea of using the disturbed land, the highest and lowest in the disturbed land.
So
But it's
I
just a
put
division.
i.e. and use the second sentence.
Yeah, you could do that, yeah. Yes, you could do that, i.e., but then the ratio of the vertical distance to the horizontal. So just switch those two
Oh,
words.
okay.
I know what you mean.
So it
You know
would
what I
be i.e.,
Otherwise, mathematically, it's contradictory.
the ratio of vertical distance to horizontal.
Yeah, again, a really minor thing, but
Oh, no, it's important. Distance.
I became a lawyer, so I didn't have to do math, so it's good you guys are.
That's
Emil
not the
became an
truth.
architect, so you didn't have to do math.
oh, wait a minute now.
That's an engineer joke.
I'm an engineer.
I did add a definition of alteration and drainage characteristics, and that wasn't there previously, and I stole that from somewhere else that I thought was
Yeah.
interesting, and then to make reference for inapplicability. That didn't exist there before either.
So any other comments on this?
None.
I'm assuming you're going to go through and do spell check and things like that, or is that done?
It should be done automatically through the Word.
Let's see, I can't
program.
find the page right now, but under the reference to volume 2, I think it says low-impact development techniques instead of techniques. I'm just not on the right page yet.
Possible.
What page is that on?
I fully expect we'll come back to this with further revisions, and we'll also take a look at the rules and regulations at that time as well, so we can devote considerably more time to this endeavor then.
Yeah, I think Pat and I have what we need to update this version of the bylaw and put it in a more finalized form, and then dig into the regulations and try to have a working draft of the regs ready for review at a subsequent meeting.
And I think if anyone had any further comments, or upon reflection after this meeting, they had some comments, you can forward them to Patrick, and he in turn can forward them to Pat and Alex. So we don't have to spend too much time tonight on this because we have some other important items on our agenda. So Alex and Pat, do you need anything more from us at this juncture?
I'm all set, Madam Chair. I think I have my marching orders, so I appreciate it.
Great, thank you for your work, and Pat, thank you for your efforts as well.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, everyone. We'll be back in touch again soon.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Take care.
So now we are going to turn to the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary Reuse Initiative. And I'm sure you all received the memorandum that I sent around several days ago. And so the first topic I wanted to consider was the questionnaire. And my observation, and I think maybe others share it, is that there was really no uniformity with respect to the responses to the questionnaires. And I thought maybe I could ask Bill to comment further on that, because he did some statistical analysis. And I don't know to what extent that there's a lot of validity to those statistics, because it's not a big sample size relative to the number of voters in town. And obviously, the people who filled out the questionnaires are self-selected, and that they have a strong interest in what's happening or what could happen at the seminary. But Bill, if you could share with
Sure.
us your observations, that would be great.
There are about an equal number of abutters and non-abutters, 24, 25. And with regards to the first question, the abutters strongly preferred, ranked first, single-family development, then 55-plus townhomes, and at the bottom of the ranking was apartments, and very bottom was commercial development, whereas the non-abutters were almost the reverse. The most preferred use by non-abutters was actually the commercial, which was the last use of the abutters. And then it's interesting, 55 was number 2. And then apartments, townhouses, and single family was the least preferred by the non-abutters. In terms of so there's really quite a big difference. And in terms of the criteria, the abutters, ranked town character, open space, and then, added tax revenue in that order, with tax revenue being least important and character and open space being more important. And the abutter and the non-abutters were exactly the opposite. They were quite concerned about tax revenue, and town character and open space were below that. Some of this, in general, the ranking between the most and the least is statistically significant. The ranking between, the second and the third, or the third and the fourth, sometimes is not statistically significant because the sample size is small. But when the difference between the most preferred and the least is several points, that's quite significant. So there's really a big difference between abutters and non-abutters.
Do you
As you would expect.
And the abutters are actually it's a pretty good group. I mean, there was 25 respondents, but you have all the people in Bridge Street and Woodbury and Essex and Miles River. So you've got 4, sides of abutters.
Do you think in part that the emphasis on the commercial might be owing to a misconception that commercial development has a higher tax rate than residential development, when in fact,
No, I think it doesn't have. I don't think. That's not really clear. I mean, anybody who understands the town finances knows that we don't classify, so everybody has the same rate. But it's certainly true that I think that people understand that $20 million of commercial rate is going to net the town more revenue, after schools and other kinds of services relative to $20 million of residential. I think I'm a little surprised by the single-family development. The town is totally developed single-family, and the non-abutters rank that as something very low, and I think that's their least preferred. And I think they've been told, we can argue about whether this is true or not, but I think they've been told and believe that single-family development doesn't pay for itself. And I think that is something that is really, really open to debate. So on average, in the town, single-family development of $700,000, which is what the average house is, pays for the school budget. But the average house in town only has half or a third of a student because we have so many elders who are staying in town with no students. I asked Patrick, and he did a year ago, to look into 25 or 30 houses that had been built in the last 3 years, single-family houses, and they were all from sort of $1 million to $1.8 million, and look at the school enrollment. And he was quite surprised, and so was I, that the school enrollment was only an average of a half a child per house. And it's very clear that the single-family housing that developers want to build in this town is twice the price, at least, of the average house in town. People are building things on Bay Road, they're building things in Wenham at, $1.4 million up. And those houses yield a fair amount of tax revenue. I mean, those houses yield $25,000 of tax revenue, which would be enough to support, 1.5 child probably. I mean, using average cost pricing, that's another issue. So, I mean, they're certainly nowhere near as profitable as a commercial development, which doesn't impose any burden on the schools. But I don't think, I get this impression, I mean, it's surprising to me that a town that is completely single-family and has always been, all of a sudden sort of turns against that use, and other than the abutters. And I don't want to speak for why that's true, but it does seem to be true.
Well, I would observe that Barry Abramson came to the conclusion that the single-family housing would be
It'd be break even. But he was using 1.3 child per household.
right.
And
It's-
that's a ratio that comes from the ULI handbooks nationally. It doesn't come from looking
Well,
locally.
he spoke with the school superintendent, and I actually, I think one of the abutters cited a study that was conducted by the Massachusetts Area Planning Council. That study was done in 2016, I believe, and Barry Abramson looked at a study from 2016, but talked to the school superintendent.
Recording in progress.
And I think that the whole issue is really complicated. So I asked him about the one study, and he didn't dismiss it, but he indicated to me that to actually drill down and identify what the actual costs would be would require a lot of effort and a real study of the demographics in town. So I think that it's almost impossible for us to actually come to a hard conclusion about that.
I mean,
We could
there's a
it's
couple
not the-
conclusions. There's a
the
couple
most,
conclusions you can come.
The best.
There's a couple conclusions you can come to, which is certainly true that new single-family housing development at $1.5 million is more profitable than the average existing house
Right.
at $700,000. Okay, so that's a conclusion you can come to.
But we also have to
And the other
consider-
conclusion, I think, is that it's certainly not as profitable as a, behemoth life sciences facility that, per dollar, because there's no use of the schools there or of any services. Remember, those facilities not only don't use schools, they usually have security systems and sprinkler systems, and, they probably don't even draw as much from the safety services the town provides as houses do.
Well, I was just going to reference the housing production plan and the actual dearth of housing choice opportunities in Hamilton, because obviously the people in Hamilton, particularly seniors, might not be able to afford $1.5 million houses, and that's the problem. And the taxes, even if they own their own homes, their taxes are sometimes a problem. So, the counter to that is, you may be right, but housing choice is something that Hamilton lacks. I mean, we lack rental housing, and we lack, housing for people who are empty nesters. And they move to Gloucester.
It depends. The low end of the housing market here is single-family housing just built 50 years ago, 1,500 square feet, 2,000 square feet. There's also some townhouse developments like the Junction. Those are all under $700,000, but that's half the houses in town. I mean, I would actually say, if you look at the distribution of houses by value, okay, the houses that are built now are way on the far expensive spectrum, but they're counterbalancing all the houses that are very inexpensive, which are what is costing the town so much money. I also worry about the fact that I think it's fair to say many of the inexpensive houses in town are occupied by elderly people who are aging in place, and when they sell or
Recording
pass
in
away,
progress.
they are not going to sell to other aging households. They're going to sell to young households. That's what happens to houses. They turn over from old to young, and new families will move in and spend some money and fix up the houses. But they're going to be living in a house that's $700,000 or $800,000 with 1, 2, or 3 kids, and that will pose a great fiscal burden on the town.
Right.
When the people who are aging in place turn over and those houses get occupied by young families, which I think is inevitable,
Right.
that will pose a real burden to the town.
Well, I don't know that we're going to resolve this. I will say
agree.
this, though. There's a difference between having the underlying zoning in place and a sale of the entire parcel to an entity like Toll Brothers, or the allowance of a small number of single-family housing on the site that wouldn't necessarily be pursuant to the subdivision control law, which actually affords the planning board little to no opportunity to impose any conditions other than to ensure that the roadways are.
The subdivision control bylaw.
Well, but that's not quite true. For example, the Toll Brothers plan wipes out all of the multifamily housing that pre-exists. And that housing is contrary to the underlying zoning. Okay? So, for example, if the planning board wanted to come up with a, say, planned single-family development of 25 units instead of the Toll Brothers 50, they could do so, and they could provide a carrot in a development agreement, which would be they would allow the repurposing of some or all of the apartments that are there, which would give Gordon Conwell considerably more money than they would get from the selling of single-family lots. But that takes the planning board, approval or a development agreement to do that. So we could fashion a development agreement which would say, we're going to have so many single-family units, and they're going to be laid out in some kind of plan. And, by the way, we will also allow the repurposing of the, let's say, the newer apartment complex, perhaps converted into, senior apartments, perhaps converted into senior condos. And I don't think that would in any way reduce the value.
Just to let you know, we still can't see
Carefully done.
anyone.
Reduce the
or hear
value of the
anyone.
remaining
Sorry.
land for single-family development, which we could plan. It would be a little quid pro quo there.
Sorry, guys.
Well,
Patrick's computer, when Alex left, froze and then kicked everyone out of the webinar.
Yeah, I got
Somehow?
kicked out.
Did you get kicked out?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm back in, I think.
But no, I don't think the audio, because since Hamilton, the
Recording in progress.
So how much was I blocked out?
probably the entire. I'm not
You're
exactly
gonna make
sure.
me
It's hard.
make me re-say all of
I
that?
heard what you were saying, but I'm not sure what anyone else heard. That's why I added Ken, because I can't see you.
Can try and kick us.
But this is me.
Did Patrick leave? Is that it?
Yes.
Patrick had to leave. His computer shut down when Alex left.
What would you prefer, Madam Chairman?
But
Well, there's nothing you can do about it. I think if it isn't recorded,
it.
Are we recording now?
Well, here's some comments. I'm not hearing any sound. HCAM needs to be panelist. There's no HCAM in the meeting is the problem.
oh, okay.
Excuse me,
That's what
Madam
my
Chair,
question
just to
was.
let you know, the public still cannot view or hear any of the proceedings.
Yeah, I was going to make a...
It's being recorded, it's just not on.
It's not being transmitted live.
Not being broadcast.
Not being
Oh, it
broadcast.
is, like, you guys are, but it's just not going on to the Zoom. So just the people on the Zoom can't, participate
So-
right now. But I'm working on it. I'm
Yeah,
trying.
we got...
He said he can't hear anything or,
No one in the audience can hear
Yeah.
us or see us. Because
Now or back then?
since Alex.
since Alex left, I
left.
think.
Yeah.
And it's continuing now,
It's continuing now.
the blackout.
Can you write some-
We might have to, that might negate, I'm not a lawyer, would that negate this meeting if we can't?
It might, because we're not,
And I just got a text. It is on TV and the broadcast is fine.
oh, can you, Pat, can you make a note to the Zoom participants?
That the town video works?
Yeah, it's on. My wife just sent me a text that it's on TV and it's a broadcast. is
Recording in
fine.
progress.
So,
Well, then I don't need to restate everything because at least it's
No.
recorded, right?
No.
Thank goodness.
So,
So-
the room is now... This is different. The room is now...
Oh, we're back on
Camera's on the screen.
that.
It should be all set now.
Ken, sorry, you're our guinea pig out there in the audience. Are you able to hear us now?
We're back in business here.
Thank you very
Oh,
much.
good, oh, good.
Thank you.
So
So-
I want to actually just follow up on that.
Well, could I just announce that even
Okay.
though the people on Zoom may not have been able to see or hear us, we were still being recorded, and the people watching the HCAM TV didn't experience any interruptions. So rather than try and recreate what was said, we're just going to proceed. And we were just talking about really single-family housing, pros and cons, if you will. So nothing definitive happens, no votes were taken.
So I want to follow up on the discussion. I agree with Marnie that, and Bill, you've always been a long-term proponent of single-family housing going back many, many years. And we've had this discussion multiple times, and I think at this point, as Marnie said, there's really, it's too difficult to define, and it's really becomes a moot point as to whether it's highly beneficial or a negative. It doesn't contribute significantly, I think we can say that, in comparison to other alternatives, such as over age 55 housing. The other comment I have is single-family housing chews up land. It's a huge inefficient use of what little land we have left in this town. And from the master plan report, and Marty, you correct me if I'm wrong, there's somewhere around 10% of the 9,500 acres that's actually buildable left to be built or preserved. And it's the only asset that this town has. So I think we should be thinking about using any and all land very carefully and very efficiently, other than single-family housing. So I think
I agree with that, and I think we should try and develop some more imaginative approaches so that we don't lose the kind of ambiance associated with single-family housing. And I know that some of the concepts Emil is putting forward are such that you could have a duplex or even a quadruplex. It would be the same form, if you will, as a very large single-family house. It wouldn't be any more out of scale, but it would house more people and provide more opportunities for people coming into the community. And I know from my own experience when I moved up here, I didn't move from Brookline, Massachusetts to Ipswich and immediately buy a house. I wanted to learn where I wanted to live, and so I end up in Hamilton. But I rented for 2 years and really explored the various communities on the North Shore before making that decision. So I think we should move on. And again,
I'd like to hear from other board members,
Yes,
and so.
and I agree, but I think, there's a difference between the whole site as single-family housing and, maybe a single-family house as a part of a 55-plus development. So, Jonathan, please.
Oh, okay, I'll hear from myself then.
No, you make your comment.
Okay.
I'd like to hear from myself.
So, first of all, I'd like to sort of shift away from kind of a binary look at this of, at one end of the spectrum in the questionnaires, back to the questionnaires, that there's commercial, in favor of commercial, and the other end is single-family houses. Well, those are just the two extremes, and there's lots of things in the middle. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. And the second thing, I would like to echo what Rick just commented on, that single-family housing is inefficient. It also is the most disruptive strategy for this site. In other words, a good number of the respondents in the questionnaires said, I want to maintain the character of the neighborhood. I favor single families. Well, those are, in a sense, contradictory statements. Because if you favor single family, well, then forget the buffer zones, forget trees, forget steep slopes. Pretty much the whole site would be bulldozed. And on top of that, some of the respondents even said, and please don't repeat Bridge Street. Well, guess what? The entire site would be Bridge Street. So I think that's a really important point.
But it needn't be. We could plan it differently.
If it's a subdivision, you cannot control that.
Well, but we have this
If you do some
elaborate,
sort of
we
cluster.
have this development agreement model.
But that goes away with a subdivision. We have no control with a subdivision other than meets and bounds and roadways and fire.
I understand, but if we fashioned a development agreement around
No.
single-family development,
Things. You're trying to put oranges and meatloaf together.
well, I mean, I agree about the slopes. It's not an ideal piece of land for a large subdivision.
If you take the underlying district, that doesn't connect up with the development agreement. And that's what single-family housing is, the underlying.
No, you can have a development agreement that does anything.
No, you can't. The underlying R1B allows 1 acre, single-family housing. Toll Brothers, if the
I understand, but
seminary came and.
but if they revert to the underlying zoning, then their apartment buildings are not authorized, and they cannot repurpose them. All right? So that we can say, we're happy to allow you to repurpose those
Well, you're missing
as
the-
part of a development agreement where the remainder of the land is developed as single family.
You were missing the point. if Toll Brothers bought the property, they'd level all those buildings.
That's what
And-
Toll Brothers would do.
Yeah.
But the development agreement would prevent them from doing that.
No, 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 no.
Why wouldn't, maybe
Trying
we should
to-
ask Jonathan about this. Why wouldn't, okay.
Yeah, no, there may be some truth, but we're not going to resolve it right now.
Okay.
So we can think about that. We can, let's keep that in the back of our head. But what I want to do right now, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but you did indicate to me that you had house guests and wanted this meeting to be kind of quick. So, so I don't think we can resolve this, but.
I would
did you-
still like to hear from other board
Yes.
members.
Emil, did you have something to add about that?
Yeah, I agree that, I mean, we have to ask ourselves as a board, planning board, what's our responsibility? What is it that we're supposed to do? And it is really look out for the interests of the town in general and to do things like protect the environment, satisfy social needs and so forth, and provide for economic development or, do some revenue that helps the town revenue. Now, I too think that this day and age, single-family housing is being eliminated across the country in many states as a zone, and for good reason, I think. And I support a lot of what I've heard, in that it is a land grab, and at a time when a place like Hamilton does not have that much land left and can't create any more, so it is. It, to me, is not a wise course. And then the other argument that Jonathan was alluding to is the sort of the middle housing that's missing here in this community. That's sort of the target range that we were looking at. Would not be providing in the illustrative plan that many units there, but it's a type of housing that's modeled on an estate house, but it's intended to support anywhere from 2 to 4 different households, within that unit. Again, the neat thing about the form of that is that it's a familiar form in that neighborhood. So it would be really in keeping with the general neighborhood. But what it also does is introduce everybody who will live there to the open spaces that surround it on both sides, the east and on the west. So it's going to be a wonderful environment without filling everything up uniformly with a sprawl-like configuration of single-family housing.
And it preserves buffers all the way around the site.
Buffers would,
All the way around the site.
and you'd have more interesting scenery, especially if we could keep the heritage landscape intact.
In the retreat house?
And the historic buildings, it would be quite, I think, a remarkable place here in town that would have its own characteristics and character, and it would be really an asset to the community.
And there's no reason why there couldn't be some single-family houses sprinkled in there for
Yeah.
variety. And it comes back around to the purposes and intent of all of our bylaws, which is to provide
It's-
diversity of
It's
housing.
actually that variety that really matters, to have the single-family mixed with larger estate-type houses in that, so you don't have a single unit that's repeated 50 times across the landscape, which is what developers do. I mean, they do one model or 2 models and repeat it, and all uniformly dispersed across the... I hear what Bill is saying, and the concept is interesting to me by keeping the dormitories and getting those renovated. And then if there is to be another residential component, contrive something that is, again, single-family housing, essentially, but is that really the right thing to do, the right way to go on that? I think you can do that within a development agreement, so I think that is a concept that could work there. The thing is single-family housing really what we think, I think, Hamilton, and that's part of what the questionnaire was to kind of bring out. The other thing that we are really looking for is how much development there will the people tolerate, will residents tolerate, not only the abutters, but, town-wide, because that's something we have to be very mindful of. Discussions of large buildings there, I mean, you could do large apartment buildings to house people there, but there again, that's really not the scale, I think, the town could tolerate there. That's something that, I don't know, Bill, if you were able to discern from the information from the questionnaires, whether there was any kind of sense of intensity or capacity from.
I didn't sense any preference
Yeah,
for density. There was this preference for commercial.
yeah,
And I mean, I look at 300,000 square feet of office or life sciences, and I think anywhere from 700 to 1,000 cars a
Yeah.
day. That's morning, and 1,000 cars in the evening, trying to get in and out of that site. That's that's a car every 6 or 10 seconds. That's just like an endless stream
yeah.
lined up trying to get in and out of the place. And I mean that would be, 500 square feet per worker. The seminary says, well, there were 1,200 people at one point there, but most of those were residents. They weren't all commuters coming in and out at 9 o'clock in the morning and leaving at 5. I mean, I think this really is going to be, I mean, at that scale of development, I think there really would be a transportation bottleneck. I don't know how to get around that.
Right. Pat, did you have any comments on that?
Just a concern that the bylaw is becoming so prescriptive in allowing a certain type of development in very specific areas that it ultimately will apply maybe to no projects. And making sure we allow enough flexibility in what's done where and where the zones are defined. But then again, maybe, anyone who's going to go there to that site and invest $40 million in the infrastructure to support whatever development they're looking at is not going to be too concerned about a process going through a special permit process, and that the density in one area is going to affect. It's like it's a really complex problem to solve. If one area is being developed with a density that allows this, and then another zone just adjacent to it has a density that allows it, but then like combined, if that happens first, and then you got to concern yourself with what happens then downstream of that, and how it impacts the utility infrastructure on that site.
That's exactly right. And unless anybody else has anything to add, I would like to turn to the draft overlay district that Patrick sent to you, I think about May 5th or May 9th or somewhere in there. And then just this afternoon, I asked him to send a revision that I had done. I switched some sections to make them a little, to make the whole draft a little more cogent. But it's a complex document. I don't think that we have the time this evening to dig deep into it, but the thinking that I would like the planning board to consider and if appropriate, endorse, is that there are two avenues here. There are two options. Emil and Jonathan have come up with some illustrative plans. So those illustrative plans really are addressed to the lower portions of the campus, the various neighborhoods that they have identified, primarily the central residential commercial district. There are no illustrative plans for the Browns Hill, the upper portion of the campus. But basically, the way this bylaw is drafted, and it's by no means final and can be tightened up and clarified, but that if a developer, an applicant came in and elected to utilize one of the illustrative plans and substantially comply with that illustrative plan, they would be entitled to a presumption that they satisfied certain provisions of the bylaw, which everyone is familiar with because those provisions mirror the provisions of 8.1.12 of the bylaw, not the Great Estate bylaw, but the Open Space and Farmland Preservation Development bylaw. You would, an applicant would be deemed to have satisfied that and would be presumed to have satisfied certain other provisions relative to the issuance of a special permit. So the use of the illustrative plans gives you an abbreviated special permit process that in the draft is denominated SP subscript 1. And if a developer wanted to come up with a concept plan untethered to the illustrative plan, that's fine, but that special permit would have to be more strictly scrutinized, and the planning board would be able to exercise more discretion. And there are uses as of right, and that those uses pertain to the existing dormitories.
Here's I think you use the term "a developer." The problem is that the developer that's going to want to repurpose one set of apartments is different from the developer that's going to want to repurpose the other set of apartments, and they're different from a developer who would logically undertake the stable residential density on the lower, and they're different from a developer who would put in an assisted living facility, and they're different from a developer who would build another 100,000 square feet and repurpose the top of the hill
Yeah.
for commercial. And I'm just terribly worried that what we're doing with the plan is we're so proscriptive that we're cutting people off from other ideas. Maybe, for example, for some reason, the corporate people really don't want the top of the hill. They would rather have the flat and the apartments, and egress would be easier rather than have all these cars stream down the hill every evening. And they would really want that. And, you know, if they could somehow partner up with a senior housing developer, which is very unlikely, that the senior housing people would take over the top of the hill. It's just.
Well, there's
I mean, it's
nothing-
come without a plan before us, without a series of developers
There's
before.
nothing
do
to
that.
prevent that. See, that's what I'm
I
trying.
understand that, but maybe the simplest thing is to say, look, we're going to put a big buffer around this land, right?
Well,
And we're going to set quotas, and we'll set 1 or 2 no development areas, and then the rest is just, no more than 20 units of this size, no more than 20 units of that size, no more than whatever development quotas you want, and as long as you have, a really big buffer zone around everything, just set limits on how much of each development you want, and don't actually do a plan. Let somebody come in and try and figure it out themselves.
There's an infinite number of things that could happen there.
Yes.
That's the problem, and
But
we're not
that's
given
true.
any direction from the owner of the property that, the idea, because there was no concept plan put on the table, the town is in a position to say, well, we can decide what we would like to see there, as a community, and then provide the incentive for a developer to put that particular project in place. So it's an incentive, so it's using some prescriptive bylaws as an incentive for a developer to pursue that. And a developer could say, no, I don't want to do that, that's fine.
That's the
nothing's-
option too.
nothing's
That's the
precluded then.
option too.
But suppose, realistically, a corporate developer comes in and says, fine, I'll do the top of the hill, but I don't like what's going on the bottom of the hill. That worries me, but I don't want to spend $30 or $40 million.
But the owner of the property is going to decide, we're going to sell the whole thing, part of it.
But he
that they want to
he
stay
would
there.
be.
So that's up to the owner of the property to decide how to parcel up the site. We don't, the town.
But the owner in this case is the theological seminary.
Yes.
And
There's a comment made in the library, and maybe Ken can clarify it, but I thought it interesting that when asked what was the preference of the seminary on this site as far as like where they would occupy space, the answer was it depends on how the bylaw is updated and in what conditions you put on particular zones, or maybe that can also be more clearly defined or understood so that we don't,
Well, I think at the last meeting, Mr. Barnes, Dr. Barnes said the top of the hill is where they would probably, if they were to stay there, that would be the area where,
As a
He's
got
practical
his hand
matter,
up, but-
as a-
that's where the buildings are.
that's where the academic.
but you're assuming that they
buildings are.
want to keep the academic area, not the community center.
I have no idea what they're going to do, and
Ken's got his hand up, he can
No,
try.
you had it, maybe it'll tell us.
That's right.
Yeah.
You want to give Ken a moment?
Yeah, if he wants to explain what portion of the site they'd wish to retain, that would help us immensely.
yeah.
Good luck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I said at the meeting at the library, we don't have a preference because the market will have to determine where our preferences lie. If the bylaws are written in a way where a particular portion of the property is more marketable than another portion, then we will go wherever the market takes us. So if someone came and said, we really like the flexibility, as it were, and the ability to put in commercial buildings or repurpose existing buildings for commercial purposes, laboratories, et cetera, on the hill, and we can do it by right because we're not leaving that footprint. And if we go beyond that footprint, we understand there'll be other requirements for approvals. Then we will decamp to the middle of the campus, most likely. If the opposite happens, if we're in a situation where the market really loves that middle portion and the bylaws make it so that they can get sufficient density for it to be economical, then we'd probably be forced to stay on the hill. But please understand, we don't have a preference for the hill. Even though those buildings are there, part of the problem is it's 150,000 square feet and we only need 30,000. So the fact that those buildings are there doesn't mean that we have a preference to stay. We'd find a way to make it work if we had to, but at the end of the day, that's why, I think I understand what both Bill and Emil are saying, but I think Bill is correct, and I think Pat is correct in saying that if the drawings, et cetera, are too prescriptive, we're going to end up with a piece of property that nobody can develop.
Well,
And that doesn't help anyone.
Could I just explain to you that those illustrative plans are not mandatory? There is nothing to stop an applicant from coming in and presenting its own concept plan, its own ideas for what it wants to build. Anywhere.
I do understand that, and I appreciate that. Thank you. All I'm
So
saying
there's
is,
nothing- there's
for the
no-
purposes,
something that's
all I'm saying-
prescriptive that what we find to be beneficial for the town. Emil and Jonathan have shown that the illustrative plans can produce substantial income and revenue for both the town and the seminary while preserving the perimeter buffers and other preferences that the planning board have identified. But those illustrative plans, their use is not mandatory in the draft that we're considering. So a developer, an applicant can come in and present the planning board with a proposal, but it's not going to be a smooth sailing. And in part, we have to have this special permitting process for several reasons. One, we don't know the capacity of the septic system. Two, we don't know the extent of water usage. Three, we don't know what volume of traffic would be involved with various levels of density on the site. These types of civil engineering studies can either be conducted by the seminary or their costs can be shifted to the developers. And the planning board, as a consequence, would have to review all those civil engineering studies carefully because we have no idea of the sequence of development. So the first developer on the site, they can come in and they can establish that the capacity of the septic system, the wastewater treatment system is probably fine. But maybe the third or fourth developer that comes into the site may run into a huge obstacle. So we have to leave the door open so that there can actually be cogent planning and not a free-for-all because there are so many unknowns that, at least in my view, and the view of the Collins Center, and I sent the article that was produced by the Collins Center with respect to the contents of a development agreement. Most development agreements consider infrastructure costs and have those studies up front for the benefit of anyone coming in. But that's not the case here. So we have to consider everything. It's all there because we're essentially being asked to play three-dimensional chess here.
Can I just jump in?
Madam Chair, I don't disagree with some of what you've just said.
I'd like to
All
hear
I'm
what
saying
Rick has
is
to
that
say.
the further we get away from the illustrative plans, the more onerous the approval process becomes. So all we're saying is that we would like to see, and we will get back to you next week with more specifics. Now that we have the draft bylaw, we will go through it point by point and present to you
The
our
draft-
concerns.
Excuse me, Dr.
but
Barnes.
what-
The draft bylaw hasn't been adopted by the planning board yet. That's what we're
I
trying to do
understand.
tonight.
That's why we want to get back to you with our observations. We want to get back to you with our observations before anything is voted on. And that just makes sense. So what we're saying is that we would hope that the illustrative plans and other elements of the proposals we've seen so far, as Patrick said, as Bill said, as others have said, would not be so prescriptive that it makes it that much more onerous, that much more difficult for a developer to put something there that, by the way, we don't want anything outrageous there because the probability is we will still be living there. So we don't want anything outrageous either. So the purpose of my interjecting just now was to simply say, please don't assume that just because the buildings on the hill are where we operate now, that we have a preference for the hill. We don't have a preference for the hill. We want to see this property developed in a way that is sensitive to everybody's needs and is a win-win for the town and the seminary. That's all.
Rick?
Yeah, so we really are dealing with just two areas, the central and the upper campus. The illustrative plan, which we haven't seen, so we don't know what that means yet.
Oh, you've had those illustrative plans, iterations of them for
Well, that gives
6
me the
weeks.
zones, right?
No,
No, the
yeah, you
above.
saw the low, medium, and high.
Yeah.
That was
Oh,
done to establish
So
capacity.
that's what we're
Let me just
calling
finish.
the illustrative plan.
But that's not the final
You're
product,
not-
Right, no, I get it.
because we have to now,
No, I get it.
okay.
We don't know what that looks like yet. We know
But we're zooming in on it.
components of it, but
Yes.
we don't know
Right.
what that illustrative plan is. From what I'm gathering, and nothing is definitive, so I understand that. This is conjecture on my point, is through that illustrative plan in the central campus, some parts of it, I don't have the nomenclature of each particular zone, but the developable portions that were shown, I'm guessing favor some sort of residential uses that will be using the land wisely and probably offering a variety of housing types, which is all good, all to the good. The upper campus, from what I'm gathering from this conversation, has not been included in an illustrative plan, but is there the opportunity to do that?
Beyond, because what was done by David Gamble was to put additions on those buildings up there. The starting point, the assumption was that those buildings would remain, because if you take them down, you can do anything on top because
that-
of the,
that-
but the
that's what I'm-
constraint is the size of it.
That's what I'm assuming is going to happen.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm making a lot of assumptions here.
Yeah.
But based on conversations and, strategic assessments and
Yeah.
that the most market favorable development on that entire campus is a residential type use. Because we know, at least from the information we've received, that it's unlikely to be office, it's unlikely to be biotechnology, the costs are just, the economics don't work there. Doesn't mean it can't happen. It could happen. But I think from what I've heard from the abutters and the general public, is that unless there's some superb commercial, low-impact commercial business that wants to locate up there, that it's really likely to be some form of residential.
And that's very consistent with
No,
what Barry Abramson said.
Yeah, no, this is a long-winded, so, I mean, what we're doing here, and this gets to what Pat said, is we're prescribing potential preferred development options, right? At least in the central campus. You could potentially do that on the upper campus as well. Because the lower campus we've kind of taken care of that. It's a by right use.
The
Right.
dormitories.
Okay. So you could say, and so now I'm going to move a little bit farther and say, okay, and Marnie, you said, well, it would be presumed, if it met the illustrative plan, it would be presumed to be, and I can't remember your exact words, but it would be presumed to be in alignment with the intents and purposes of prior bylaws.
Right, and I have
In other
the
words, it wouldn't be a
provisions.
heavy lift.
It would be a lighter lift.
It'd be a very light lift. So and that's where the devil is in the details. So I'm wondering if it makes sense to move in that direction in both the middle and upper campus. And I'm not going to say by right, but presumption that if you meet the illustrative plan, this is a pretty easy approval process. So you say, okay, that's what we'd like to see here, and we're going to make this relatively painless, inexpensive, and easy as long as you comply with the components of the illustrative plan. Doesn't mean you can't do something completely different. But I think once something happens in the central zone, it takes off the upper zone for some other radically different use. It's not it doesn't mean it won't happen, but it means you've already, now you have two residential clusters, lower and mid. So upper would be pretty unusual not to become some sort of residential use, some sort of housing use. So that might make sense, but the devil is in that detail of the presumed approval. And that's what everybody is worried about. I know certainly the seminary, Pat mentioned it, Bill mentioned it, I'm concerned about it. We don't want to be too prescriptive. So if we say, hey guys, pretty easy to develop two components here for a preferred usage that meets the illustrative plan. So I kind of like that approach. The second, and this is where it gets all confusing, if somebody comes in and says, well, I want to use the whole remaining upper and middle. Okay, so we're into a more complex and detailed special permit process. Again, devil will be in the details there of what does that mean? So I'm wondering if that approach, it actually can be pretty clear that we say, hey, here's what our preference is. Here's the fairly easy approval process. But if you want to do something different, that's fine, but we're going to apply a more strict approval process.
And that's what this draft that I gave you says. The option 1, option 2.
Well, the only difference is, excuse me, and maybe you're doing it by intent that I'm not clear on, is if you did the same thing at the top. And so you had the central on the top with an illustrative plan.
They're very different areas. We did the bottom because this was also the result.
Central, right.
Well, there is no bottom. I don't know why.
The lower,
I don't know.
the residential.
The residential section.
Yeah.
There's an upper and a lower.
Yeah.
But the, This plan really developed out of the workshop we had, where we started with principles, worked toward preferences. We all were familiar with the site, we'd done a site walk, and we determined what the assets of the site were, which ones we felt should be preserved. And then the test was, well, can you still get economic development, enough revenue to make this competitive with alternative sources? So that you got not only the revenue source for the community, you're preserving some of the valuable, say, environmental aspects to
Oh,
the
yeah,
site.
yeah, yeah.
So we did the preferences. And that was the goal, to do that, and also to provide a mixed use of housing, the middle housing concept that is kind of missing in this community. But that was the goal. We felt, and I'm speaking for myself, not Jonathan, but the top of the hill, there are so many options up there. If you were to eliminate those buildings, which we didn't want to do because that's not our
Oh, I understand.
purview.
I understand.
But if those buildings were to go away, there's any number of things that could happen. In fact, there could be, like David Gamble said, you could put the biolab up there. But do you want to wait for the biolab, a 200,000 square foot biolab to be put on? And how's that going to be tolerated by the community? I mean, we could come up with a concept without doing any engineering. Then that's, as Marty pointed out, that is the problem we are having right now,
No, understood.
is that we can't, this is
I-
a hard code to write,
I
to be honest.
get it.
Yeah.
And I could be completely off base and completely wrong here, but my gut is telling me from what I'm hearing from people is, and people on the board has said this as well, is if you took the top, cleared it, and you put up high-value senior housing, and in the middle, you've got a mix of different housing types appealing to different ages and incomes, would help offset that lower value of that property. And it states a preference, and it keeps the residential component, but it offers a lot of different housing opportunities and types that the town desperately needs, while maintaining the character, the setting, the public access to that, and just say, hey, guys, if this is what our preference is, and we'll make it pretty easy. But if you want to do something completely different, that's okay too.
The problem,
I think we have gotten sort of tied up in this idea that we have to have something by right. And, I mean, in an urban setting, nobody gets 100 acres and does anything and expects to develop something by right.
Right.
Baloney. You go in, you know you're going to bargain, you know there's going to be special permits, you know you're going to, do endless, machinations. And I think anybody that is looking at this hill would expect that. I mean, I understand the seminary's view that, we have to have something by right because that's marketable. But, I'm not, because that aids the marketability of the project. Sure, but it also limits it. I mean, I think if you have 100 acres and you try and protect the town and the abutters and the traffic, and you have buffers, and then you sort of say, within the limits of that, you can have yay much this, yay much that, yay much this, but that's all by special permit. And I think private developers would look at that, and they'd scratch their head and, call their designers and say, can we do anything with this that makes sense? Or, a corporate campus would look at it and sort of say, could we do anything with this? And I think they would expect that they're going to have to go through a special permit.
right, here's the thing.
And
this
we
is-
shouldn't get hung up on this by right.
Right.
Well,
but
it
said by right.
Can I
Nobody
just
said by right.
clarify? So if
I'll
the
go next.
underlying zoning district is eliminated, so this draft overlay district, and we voted on this, we took away the R1B zoning. And if you do that, legally, you have to provide,
Sure,
right.
we provide a mixed use.
Say,
okay, so if you eliminate the underlying as of right R1B zoning,
yeah.
our our attorney, John Whitten, indicated that we have to have at least
One by right.
one by right zoning, and so.
But no, we make a zoning after we define the boundaries and everything else, we say, this is a mixed-use zone
Well, no, Bill,
with so many criteria on this use and this use and this use, and so much flexibility, it's mixed use.
Bill.
There's no question we can,
Bill,
that becomes the underlying zoning.
the as of right component is the reuse of the existing dormitories. The rest of the development on that site is one form of special permit or another. But the as of right, subject to site plan review, would be the reuse of.
No, but the concept zone the concept plan has all sorts of new housing, which if you follow the plan is of right too. At least that's the way I understood it.
No, the
No?
illustrative plan.
No, so all of that is special permit?
Yes, it's
Permit light
it's
or
an
abbreviated.
Special permit
abbreviated.
light.
It's abbreviated special
Abbreviated
permit,
special-
light, SP1.
It's presumed to have met,
Certain,
and that gets to, and that's why we'll be interested in seeing the illustrative plan and the level of detail of design and compactness and all those things, because we don't know what that looks like yet. Generally,
think he's-
we have a flavor.
Yes.
But I have a feeling, coming from Emil and Jonathan, that it's going to get a lot more specific. And that's fine, I'm not arguing against that. But if it gets pretty prescriptive and specific, then it argues for being a more lenient
Yeah.
special permitting process.
absolutely. And you know,
So, and will be the fun part is, where is that line? And does it make it attractive enough? Somebody says, wow, okay, they've done a lot of pre-design work for me, they've told me what they want, and they've making this relatively easy, but it's still a special permit. I think I want to go there.
exactly. It's the
So I'm just
carrot.
saying, why not try and do that? Maybe this is a test, but why not do that in the upper campus or the top of the hill, and assume that those buildings are gone, and and it's some sort of residential use, as people keep saying. It'd be a wonderful place to have, over age 55 housing, high value, great views, all those kinds of things that make that piece of property very valuable, because now developers can come in and look and say, geez, I can do some really good housing types up there. The town, and I'm saying over age 55, the town benefits with minimal costs and probably a lower level of impact in terms of traffic and resources. And in that special permit or illustrative plan, I want those to be all those buildings, no matter how they're built, I want them to incorporate solar. I want them to be, passive solar. I want them to be, if we can get there, net zero housing, just to be that level of, prescription and resource conservation. So I'm all good with that. I just wonder if that's not.
Well, so
I'd like
that's
to
where-
address some of these things if I could. So, first, I'm going to try to answer the reason why there isn't an illustrative plan on the top of the hill yet. There could be one. The question is it necessary? And to do that, I want to go back to kind of the definition between SP1 and SP2, the light and the heavier special permit. The lighter one basically says you've complied with the equivalent of our bylaw 8.1.12, which is also environmentally sensitive site design in the stormwater management bylaws. And it's a universal conservation development approach, which is, number one, you identify the unprotected resource area, step one. Step two, to the greatest extent possible, you stay clear of those, and you establish the development area. Step three, you figure out where the roads are, and then you figure out where the buildings are. So what our illustrative plan does is those steps very, very specifically. And the reason that it was important to do it on the lower campus there is because it's a more complex puzzle to solve. There's historic buildings, there's steep slopes, there's mature trees, there's historic topography and the heritage landscape, and it's a whole package. At the top of the hill's already been disturbed and developed. It's a tabletop. There's buildings up there, maybe you keep them, maybe you don't keep them. Your only constraints up there are the perimeter buffer to honor the needs of the abutters and the rest of the town, and you have water tanks up there, and you have a cell tower up there that has to be dealt with. So it's a much simpler site to develop. So when you go through those steps of identify the unprotected resource areas, identify the development area, identify the roads, and identify where the buildings go, it's much easier. We can do an illustrative plan up there, but it really doesn't help you get through those steps. I think that's the quick answer to
Well, I
that.
think what
So
Rick
we can
is-
do it, it can be done, but it doesn't really help you up
I
there.
think what Rick is saying, if I might put words in your mouth, wouldn't it be nice to have a really wonderful senior housing, 55-plus
Sure, why not?
complex up there? And if that were the, thinking of the planning board, well, maybe that's something that you could do. But I would not want to task you with doing something, enormous, because I know how much work it takes.
I don't
just
think
to
it's
get-
necessary.
Not
It could be done, it's not necessary, and I just gave the reasons.
Right.
No, why, but I don't understand the reasons. Are you?
Because the top of the hill is already disturbed. It's all, there aren't steep slopes, there aren't unprotected resources that need to be tap danced around like there are in the lower campus.
Got it.
Okay.
So wouldn't that
So-
make it easier?
Yes, so you don't need, to comply with 8.1.12 and the environmentally sensitive site design, which again is mirrored in the stormwater management bylaws, stormwater management state laws, it's easy to get there. It's already a light lift because it's already disturbed. It's already.
I get it.
It's already defined.
I get it. And that's my point.
So, done. We don't need to make a drawing.
Well,
And you can develop in all different ways that you want. You
No,
could do
I'm-
single-family
Well, I
houses up there,
think-
you could
I-
do senior housing, you could do,
I think that the confusion is that with the illustrative plan, you automatically get the abbreviated special permit. Without it,
you've got a different plan.
you've got a different permitting process, even though you're saying that it would be easy to satisfy the equivalent of 8.1.12.
and you could probably say in words what I just said in the bylaw. In other words, you could create a plan, but you could also explain that's an already, disturbed area. It's not as complex.
Can you use the elements of the illustrative plan and apply it to the top of the hill?
I think you could, but only under certain circumstances, because I think if you had a relatively, I shouldn't say modest scale senior 55-plus housing, that would be something that probably would be desirable. But if you had a proposal for a very large
No, and that's what,
a life science building that
right. No.
could be a different equation because of the parking
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff.
No, I get it. The illustrative plan I'm thinking is the overage 55 housing for the purposes of this discussion on the top of that hill. Really simple. Can you then take the illustrative plan that's been developed for I'm using the central campus because that's what I understand it to be, and apply whatever elements need to be applied at the top of the hill, and just say, the planning board thinks this is the most efficient, cost-effective, and desirable approach to development of the property. And because of that, and we're going to make this relatively easy under a special permit light. So that's what we'd like to see. But if you have another plan, that's great. Come at it, or come to us with it, but you're going to have to go through a more
I
I don't-
understand what Rick is saying. He's basically saying that the.
Give me a
planning
carrot at the top
board
of the hill.
Should have a carrot on the top of the hill.
Yes,
with
I
senior
understand.
housing.
Yeah.
And we also have a time constraint
Yeah,
here.
that's
We have a
the-
time constraint, and there's a lot of work
Awful lot of
in,
work to do.
in this stuff.
And it's not really critical to doing the whole thing right. And that's the thing that,
This is a case of, the perfect is the enemy of
if there
getting
is
this
some
done.
concern by if there is a developer who wants actually the whole site and is not going to be happy if somebody else buys the lower part, once a developer has, if they have a concept for the lower part, what happens to the upper part then? I mean, if they choose not to follow the illustrative
Right,
plan,
well,
what
if it-
happens? Is it all of a sudden going to go with the illustrative
What-
plan on the top?
I can
It doesn't make
yeah.
any sense because there may not be any compatibility between the upper and the lower. So we can't predict that.
No, I know,
It's
but,
also not up to the planning board to decide what goes on there, what the purpose of
no.
that site is.
Actually, maybe this is a tempest in a teapot. Because if you, I hate to say that, but, if you got a nice senior 55-plus housing development on the top of the hill, as Jonathan said, the 8.1.12 is probably satisfied.
Yeah.
It's probably not really high density. We know from the 133 Essex project that the water usage is probably less than a traditional development. We know that traffic is not as much of a concern as with regular single-family housing, or certainly life science. So even though it would not be necessarily denominated an abbreviated special permit process, that process still would be much more expedient
can you then
than life
apply?
science.
Can you then apply to the top of the hill the special permit light and say, if you do this
For a particular use.
for let's say over age
55
55 housing and a certain level of density,
Right.
then it's a special permit light?
But you can't do that in a vacuum,
Why not?
because you wouldn't know what else is going on in the site.
Okay, guys, you're making this too complex. You're
You
just
could.
saying,
You could.
this is what our
Well, you could do it.
preference is. You can do whatever you want.
You have two
What's gonna-
choices.
and what's going to happen, as soon as that central core is developed, you've got on the lower campus, the dormitories by right. As soon as that central campus is developed, you've orphaned the top of the hill. You have determined pretty much what's going to happen at the top of that hill. There's no question, because nobody's going to come in there and go, well, we want a commercial development. Well, it doesn't fit. You don't have the land, you don't have the infrastructure. It's not going to happen. So,
And the same thing is true
Go with
in
reality.
reverse. You put 300,000 square feet of commercial development up, and the plans that were developed for the middle campus are wonderful, but those people are going to be in the middle of a highway.
Well, they
At every evening and every morning, they're not going to want their kids to go out there and play on the little streets because there's going to be 500 or 1,000 cars descending down the hill, going out to Essex Street or going out to Bridge Street. I mean,
No, here's the problem. We have a problem as the planning board.
so we shouldn't try and decide this.
Well, no.
we're not trying to decide.
No. I'm not even saying.
We're not doing that. But
Okay.
no one has a vision for this site other than the planning board. And nobody else is stepping up and saying, we'll do an overlay district. No one else wants to do that, even though under Chapter 48, Section 5, they all have the opportunity to do that. No one's stepping up. They're leaving it to the planning board to come up with a vision, because you can't plan without a vision. So without a vision, all you do is throw numbers on a page and hope for the best. Is that good? Is that planning? And does that really help the town 20 or 30 years from now? We can't look at this in a 5-year window. This thing is going to be.
I mean, I think you're left with two choices, which is you draw the buffers and the no-build zones to keep the local community and the abutters happy. And then you say, look, it's mixed use, and we have, for traffic and other reasons, we have quotas, and how much of this we want, and how much of that we want. Give us some plans. And the other, which is the safe bet, if you really want a vision, is you do what's already there, which is single-family housing, and you tie it together, and you tie it down with allowing the repurpose of the apartments.
Okay, we have to cut to the chase here. So here's the problem. The problem is there's no developer. In the best of all possible worlds, and I don't know if you all remember the Winchester Development Agreement and the Winchester Overlay District that Joe Demilovitz sent to all of us. But that was an example of how things actually happen in the real world. You actually have a project. We don't have a project. We have no project, and we have no studies, civil engineering studies about the expansion of the septic system. The infrastructure is a mystery, how much capacity. We don't know what the public wants in terms of capacity. So we either go with what's on the table or throw it out and start over. And if we throw it out and start over, where are we? We won't get to, I don't believe we'll get to town meeting, and I'm not sure who's going to draft the next iteration of an overlay district if we don't look at the one that's on the table now. And I hate to be that blunt, but I put a lot of work into this, and I want to, have some consensus about the concept. And I cannot reiterate strongly enough that the illustrative plans are not mandatory, but if you use them, they provide a vision for the site that will enable a future developer to, if it substantially complies, to get a easier permitting process than if a developer comes in and has its own plan for the site. And that is certainly an option. That is the flexibility that Dr. Barnes has repeated since the first time I met him. So there's the carrot and a little bit of a stick, but that flexibility exists. So when we fill in the numbers in this proposal, this draft on the table, we will essentially be doing what you suggest, Bill, because we will be putting parameters around the level of density. And at our June 6th meeting, that is what I hope we can discern from the public. What will you tolerate? And I don't think the public is going to tolerate huge volumes of traffic. We already know that the abutters are concerned about that, but I don't think our road systems can handle a huge volume of traffic. We know that the septic capacity is of some concern, certainly to the abutters. So there are a lot of questions. But what's on the table is an attempt to ameliorate the concerns of the abutters, to address the concerns of the planning board, of the seminary for flexibility, and then to do what the planning board is supposed to do, which is plan for the future and attempt to balance environmental, social, and economic needs. So I ask you all to consider whether you want to go forward with this concept or not. And I think we need to vote on it, because if there's not a majority of the board who wants to go forward with this plan that's on the table, then we have to do a hard stop, rethink, and
resign. So I want to actually support what you're saying is we need to define this enough so that there's an intrinsic value to this piece of property.
Yeah.
Because if we go the route that Bill is proposing, we don't know what the value is, and neither does the seminary, and neither does a potential developer or developers, because they're going, well, we could propose something, but we don't know how it's going to get through the funnel and how it's going to be judged. So that leaves an option. It gives no option, it gives no clarity, and basically the seminary is going to say, the hell with it. I'm selling it to Toll Brothers, or I'm doing a 40B on the entire property. Whatever maximizes their value, they will do if they don't perceive that there is an intrinsic value that the planning board gives them through some bylaw.
I'm just afraid that the way we've set the concept, I mean, it sounds logical to have this here and this here and this here, but I'm afraid it will scare off somebody that really wants to do some kind of commercial corporate thing because they don't want the residential. And the residential developers who might be intrigued by expanding the existing apartments and creating a little village down there, they don't want to have anything to do with this because they don't want to look at Big Brother Corporation possibly going in on the top of the hill. And I think I mean, it's
No, I don't think we can-
illustrative. It is illustrative,
solve
but I
that
can't see it
tonight.
ever being realized, and I worry it'll scare off either.
Actually, you know what? The conundrum you state is the problem. Because, one scenario is just do nothing and wait until someone comes on board and has a concept for the property. And at that point, when we actually have a real project, then we can go forward. I mean, that's basically, hard stop. Since there's no concept for this site, no vision for this site, we'll wait until a developer comes along and provides one. That's what you're saying. And we, if we go forward, that's a problem we'll just have to grapple with. And it's where we are right now.
Well, I mean, I think you're sort of right, and the problem is posed by the fact that we have all this huge existing stock of buildings up on the top. The lower buildings are usable, but the ones on the top,
Have minimal value.
they have. I mean, we have another development going on over on Essex Street, and they're spending 1 year and how many millions of dollars to jackhammer away a whole hill. Taking down those buildings actually looks pretty simple.
But let me just relate one experience I had, because what we're being asked to do is do nothing on this site, do nothing. One of the things that happens when you start drawing a design, you start drawing a plan like the illustrative plan, you start to bring out the problems on the site. You start to understand it in better terms. You clarify it a little bit. You massage the project. You get a little bit better. When you have, and you also give the people, the abutters and the neighbors, some idea of what could happen there, something they can react to. If there is no concept, let's wait until a developer comes, because developers know best. You wait until that developer shows up, comes up with a plan that's brand new. People are not going to understand what the details of that are. They just won't. They'll get some comprehension of the density, but they won't really understand the real eventual impact on the project. What I experienced in one situation, a developer wanted to come in and he wanted to put 1 million square feet of development in retail and in a community, my community, and residential. The town, the committee got together and decided the person who because it was contrary to the zoning regs that we were using. So it was a violation of our zoning. The attorney who was working with us on that said, you have them write the code and you approve it. If they want the project, they know it best, have them write the code and approve it. And that's exactly what probably should happen here on this. But Gordon Conwell, if they're going to sell their property, you're probably not going to do that, but a developer who would want to use it, have them write the code. If you're unhappy with an illustrative plan because it's an assumption or it's too prescriptive, the prescription is important for predictability. That's all it's necessary for. You have some certainty it's going to be built something like that, and that's the benefit of it. And that's why you do the hard work up front, to get to that predictability. If you know what you're doing and you design it correctly, you have some certainty there about the nature of the project and how it's going to fit the site. Without that, so without an illustrative plan, the next thing would be, because we're asking to write really a zone-free zone, in my opinion, on this whole site. You can wait until a developer comes and does that, but then make the developer write the code and then let the planning board approve it.
The other benefit of an illustrative plan is it informs what the design standards or metrics or maximum density, the setbacks, the lot areas. It informs all of that. Otherwise, you're trying to come up with numbers in a vacuum.
Yeah, it doesn't make,
It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I guess,
and I've never done a project where you, like the top of the hill, where you just go in and they say, do whatever you want to do on the top of the hill. I've never had a client.
I don't know, but I mean, I guess,
Do whatever you think we ought to do on top of the hill, right?
Yeah.
I guess if I was thinking without worrying about water under the bridge,
Yeah.
I would present two concept plans. One is residential, all, and the other is pretty much all commercial. Maybe you keep the lower apartments, but you sort of say much of the middle campus and the roads down, all of that is, for future expansion of the corporate headquarters up at the top.
But that sort of is antithetical to what Barry Abramson suggested. I mean, you could do that, but then, with respect to the commercial development, it may never happen.
May never happen.
And it would never pass town meeting.
Yeah.
Politically, it would die because you go to town meeting and the abutters are well-organized and well-financed, and they would show up, and all you need is 10, 15 people with torches and pitchforks at town meeting going, this is gonna ruin the town, it's gonna burden the town unfairly, and all the other things. And the members of town meeting that know nothing are going, oh, there must be a problem here. We better not pass this. I mean, that's how the politics works. I mean, we've seen it over and over again. So, there needs to be some surety and clarity here for the abutters, for all the other boards and committees, and for the general public, so that when we get to town meeting, they go, okay, this looks pretty good. Looks like you've done your homework, and the abutters have some clarity and surety about what's going on there. That's the only way this is going to work.
So, are board members comfortable with this plan that's on the table? Now, I did ask everybody to provide Patrick with a red line copy. Raise your hand if you provided Patrick with a red line copy. I revised my own draft overlay district, and I presented it to you. So,
I'd like until the library, until next week's meeting, right? We've added meetings, we've had a lot on a plate, like it's,
I
think
didn't
you-
provide any comments because I thought as a framework it was fine, but I keep
the
saying this.
devil is in the
The
details.
devil is in the details, and that's when we get to special permit light, that's when we get to the illustrative plan and the detail there. That's where the friction's gonna be, that's where the sparks are gonna fly, because that'll determine the future of this piece of property.
Right, but I have, the requirements all laid out in here. And so what I would like to do tonight is just vote on whether we should proceed with what is on the table or not. And I think that what is on the table is an interesting framework. And whether the abutters or the seminary believes me, it was an attempt to take into consideration both of their concerns. So the illustrative plans include the perimeter buffer and a lot of the preferences that the planning board identified, but, the illustrative plans are not mandatory. So it gives a developer the options to come in and convince the planning board that what they're proposing is something that the town can live with. And obviously, we have to insert some capacity, some level of density here that I hope, can ascertain on June 6th from our interactions with the public.
So, that's probably a big ask from the public.
Well, to get some kind of feedback, what do you think? I mean,
That depends on what we are proposing.
Well, we showed the high,
Yeah, okay,
mid,
okay.
low density.
Okay, so
And I think
that's the template that you're gonna
kind
use.
of show, and then,
Okay.
and then on June 6th, what, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, I hope to be able to give a brief synopsis of how we're proceeding with the two options.
Yep.
And the as-of-right for the dormitories.
Yep.
And then, I think Emil and Jonathan were going to do just a little brief synopsis of what they presented at the last meeting, and then just show, for example, David Gamble's, I think he had
It was
two.
Barry Abramson.
Barry Abramson's, anyhow, they showed the life
Revenue
sciences
stream.
in the central campus, you know, where you had a parking garage in front of the retreat house, and show the public, that's one level of density, and then our illustrative plans and what the planning board would approve, even with respect to a developer who didn't use the illustrative plan, what that level of density might look like.
In other
So,
words, just show some of the plans that came from the consultants and get a reaction from the people. Is this what you have in mind? And, and get some reaction from the public in terms of,
Weren't they, but that really was the upper campus where they showed.
no, we'll talk about that too, but it was a lower campus. They had duplexes, they had 60 duplexes across the lower campus. They had 30.
Okay.
They had 200,000 square foot
Assisted.
biolab,
Oh, okay.
or they had 100,000, and then surface parking.
Okay.
So they had different scenarios that they had worked out.
Got it.
We thought we could show that as, an alternative to the illustrative plan
Okay.
to give
I-
some.
I think we have to have some illustrative plan for the top of the hill, which is residential. I mean, you say, well, it's obvious, they just, bulldoze it and so on, but you've got some, elevations, and you have some plans drawn very quickly. I think it's just important for the public to see, the bare top of the hill with 50 clustered duplexes or whatever you want to put up there. I think it's kind of like equal time clause. I think we owe
Can I make a suggestion?
them some kind of sketch plan like that.
I agree with you, and maybe you can just take whatever the low, medium, and high density and just say, given the acreage that's available for development, minus the buffers, minus the storage for water and other things, there's approximately X number of acres that could accommodate, for example, X number of age 55 housing.
What Barry Abramson did, because he said he can get 75,
Right.
55-plus houses up there. Now, it's 20 acres. The 133 was 14 acres, and they were trying to get 50, and they
Yeah.
were really squeezed in there, and there was no open space, and there was nothing.
Right.
The other thing is the planning board has insisted on 100-foot buffers,
Yeah.
not the mere 50-foot buffer on the Bridge Street subdivided properties. So that changes. We haven't carried through some of the ideas from the consultants. We've altered them. So just
Well-
showing the consultants' plans
Well,
doesn't
if
get
we,
us to the finish
if we
line.
My
can't
sense
get
is
100 units, or we can't, because of the buffers, then that's part of what has to be illustrated in the sketch plan.
I'm going to ask Emil and Jonathan to do this, and they can send me hate mail. But if you could show an illustrative plan with Boulders type 55-plus housing, perhaps something between around 20 units, high end.
Ooh, that might be,
Fif-
that might be kind of low.
Well, how about 20 to 30?
Yeah.
What are there, 25 units in the
There's
boulders?
20 acres, you said 20 acres up there?
20 acres,
But
but you have to
it's-
deduct the tank area.
Right, so,
Tank.
so
let's-
maybe
let's-
10?
Let's say the
No,
it's 2
15.
It's 2 acres for the buried tanks. So now you're down from 20 down to 18.
Plus the
You're gonna
100-foot
lose
buffer.
10 to 15% road. So now you're down to, 18 minus 2, 16 or so. You're going to lose some for buffers. So you're going to be down to
10.
15
That's-
houses.
All right, well, let's say
Single-family
10
houses?
acres, right?
Yeah, if you had one per acre.
So under our.
But the boulders is,
So
what's
our
the
other-
density of the boulders? That was only like 8 acres.
Can-
No,
can I-
that's more, that's
So
common.
apply our senior housing bylaw, a
Yeah.
maximum of 4 units per acre, so you could have 40 units up there.
So,
As just an illustration.
so there's a meeting with the public in a week from now.
Yes.
And it's a short period of time in front of everyone. I think it's a very interesting, everyone did a great job filling out the questionnaire. And there's some interesting information and data that came from it. I could create a scatter plot plan of the results. I think it would be interesting for them to introduce the session is to show the results and then show an example of what the preference represents in an example site plan or whatever it is, as it relates to density or whatever.
Mhm.
Like here's what the results indicate.
Well, the
everyone's
results
willing to-
didn't go to the capacity, they just went to the
But
uses.
it's intuitive. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's single-family homes or if it's commercial or so
No,
whatever.
No, it's no.
It's not
No.
intuitive.
No, it's not. It's not
It's totally
intuitive at all.
subjective.
I mean, you could say commercial development, but then if you put the equivalent of New England Biolabs on the top of the hill, people would blanch.
Okay.
And I think Rick's right. I mean, number one, it's user-driven, so it may not happen. And number two, if it was that large, all bets are off.
Yeah.
And I really do think that people are a little bit confused about how commercial development is going to be so much better than residential because the tax rates are the same.
Okay, regardless of maybe not showing the example, but at least, I mean, everyone spent the hour and a half or whatever is listening to us talk. I think showing the results
Fine.
of that effort
You're up.
and
You
the
do
scatter
it.
plan.
You present it.
But it's a short, the intent was, I guess, with the amount of time left, I would like to get aligned on what we're going to have for an agenda at
Right.
that
The
session, and what
agenda
hope is of the outcome
Let's
of the
vote-
discussion.
Let's vote up or down on what's on the table, because the
Yeah.
first item on the agenda for June 6th would be just a brief summary of our
Where we're
thought
at.
process with
Well-
respect to this.
A vote down is going to stop the project.
Oh, vote down is going to stop the project. Well, stop the process, for
Good, so
sure.
we can just take the summer off.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And then Emil and Jonathan were going to do, just a little update on where they stand. But the focus is to hear from the public. Not just through the questionnaire, but actually with questions and with comments. And I'm hoping that the public goes to the planning board webpage and looks at all the FAQs, because we added FAQs with respect to the subdivision control law and also the different types of permitting as of right, and this and that. So there's additional information on the planning board's web page about what the planning board can and cannot do. So, does
So
anyone wanna-
going back to the goal and intent of the session is to give an update on where we're at briefly,
and hear
and then
from the
hear from the
public?
public as it relates to everything they've heard up until now,
Right.
outside of the,
Because the consultants put a lot of information on the table, but they never got the feedback from the public with respect to the intensity of development on the site. What capacity the public feels is appropriate for that site versus building it out soup to nuts.
because the concern I have in just an open forum is you get the whatever's on it. Like if it could be a guided tour of receiving comment, in that there's like a concept that's being proposed that we would like to get discussion around, or a particular,
Well,
if it's something that we could you can introduce and then try to get feedback on
right.
that,
Well,
which is keeping us
We're going
from.
to talk about the concept behind the plan, and then Emil and Jonathan are going to show the pictures with respect to the intensity of development,
Yeah,
to try and show people what that might look like.
Yeah, that's the purpose.
And that's the purpose.
to get feedback on density
Yeah.
or something like that. Yeah.
Oh, Ken's got his hand up.
Right, and I will just say this, that even if it's not as focused as it could be, people like to be heard. People want to be
Sure, yeah,
heard.
yeah.
And we can synthesize that information in one form or another.
Makes
But
sense.
it's really important that people get a chance to speak and tell us their
It'll be
mind.
as short as we can make it,
Yeah.
really. The idea is not to dominate, not to,
But what we missed last time, I feel, is we didn't begin at the beginning with the as-of-right plan, so we need to just present that quickly, what that would mean if you just used the underlying district and if it was single-family houses. What does that mean? What does it look like? What are the implications of it? What are the implications of the maximum build-outs of the consultants, of which there were 2 or 3 that used all of the middle campus right out to the entrance? What does that look like? And then compare that to where the board has landed. And so there'd be 3, basically what I see is 3 things to compare.
yeah.
The underlying district, single-family houses, what are the real implications of that?
Yeah.
And, does it preserve the neighborhood? What does it look like? What does it look like across the street from yourself? Is it any different from Bridge Street? And then number 2, the consultants have, their maximum build-outs are very, very different from our maximum build-outs, very different. They didn't honor the preferences that the planning board identified, and we would demonstrate how that is. It's just because they didn't get to that point. They weren't asked to get to that point. They didn't get to that point. The planning board did. So it'll be comparing the consultant's maximum build-out versus the planning board's scenarios of different sizes and an idea of what would the landing spot, because we have three levels of capacity. What would the landing spot be for a likely single illustrative plan be? And then let folks respond to that.
But that single illustrative plan might have an A and a B.
Yes.
Because this senior service care
Yes,
is
yes,
still on the
yes.
table.
But it's still the same organization with the same honoring of the preferences and buffers and internal buffers.
Right. And so, we can, I don't know if you, I hate to do this to you, but would you be willing to do an illustrative plan for some senior 55-plus housing on the Browns Hill, the top of the hill?
We will do the best we can in the amount of time we have.
Just, we could use the boulders model.
Right.
So it's not a
Yeah,
design thing.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, don't, go overboard, but, when I,
It's just an example of something that people can actually see.
Right, it doesn't have to, it's not definitive.
It's not definitive.
yeah.
Madam
it's-
Chair?
I think it's the intention with respect to that is to be indicative of the planning
Right,
board's
Right, thinking.
thinking about what would be appropriate for the top of the hill.
Can we vote on this?
Yes,
Good.
but I can't make the motion.
I'll make the motion to approve the concept, the draft, working draft, revision 8 of the Browns Hill Overlay District, with the understanding that this is just a framework that is subject to a great deal of future discussion and modification.
Do I have a second?
Second.
When I call your name, please indicate whether you vote in favor or against,
Or abstain.
or abstain. Pat Norton?
Clarifying this, we are approving a draft to be further developed.
As a framework.
Right,
It's just, it's
It's a
characterized as a
framework.
framework to be
framework.
filled in.
to be filled in. And in fact, if you had done your homework, just kidding.
Ooh, ouch.
Jonathan, so
Sure.
Pat Norton, yes?
Whoa.
Yeah, I agree to develop
To keep,
Browns Overlay District, Browns Hill Overlay
but
District.
with this framework, with the use of the illustrative plan and the alternative, where a developer can propose its own plan. Illustrative plans are not mandatory.
Right. And we're not approving the illustrative plan or zoning diagram that's being referenced or any of the.
No.
Well, they're not final yet.
Okay, yep. What do I
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
think I
Bill
said?
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Said I twice.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
I guess Beth Hur is not here, Rick Mitchell,
Rick Mitchell, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye.
Now, Ken has had his hand up for quite some
Oh,
time.
yes. Dr. Barnes, please.
Hello, yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to know if, as the owners of the property, we'll be given the opportunity to make a short presentation on the 6th.
No.
Actually, the purpose of the meeting on the 6th is to hear from the public. So that is not to say that you cannot respond and make comments at the meeting, but it's a presentation, a short presentation by the planning board. And it's, the real object is to hear from the public. So, you know, I want you to speak, but I don't think it's the time to spend, a half an hour on a presentation, because our time at the library is a bit circumscribed. So we have a start time at 6 o'clock and a hard stop at 7:45, and in the middle of all that, we have a site plan review for a deck at Canterbrook. So,
I'm sure we could say what we need to say in 10 minutes.
did the planning board members have any,
I think it's not the time to do this. There could be a subsequent meeting where, there are presentations, but this is a time for the public.
I tend to agree. And once,
I would agree with that, too.
right, and once we have our draft further along, I think that would be, you were more than welcome to come and make a presentation. And so that kind of leads into the next.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
So you said presentation. Is this presentation directly relevant in terms of comments or on the proposed working draft?
Yes, I think we would like to clarify where we stand in terms of our observations of the proposed bylaw, so that people understand that A, the seminary and the planning board are not operating in lockstep, that we appreciate all the planning board is doing, but that, if you will, we do have a quote-unquote vision for the property. We will not be the people developing the property, but we do have a sense of what would be fair and sensitive and a win-win for everyone involved. Because right now, I think there are probably a lot of people who mistakenly believe that somehow this process is fixed, as it were, that we are operating in tandem, and that what's being proposed is sort of being presented to people as an ultimatum. We don't think that's a good perception at all, because it's not the case. We have always appreciated what has happened, what has been done, but in some ways we also feel a little bit locked out. And we would simply like the opportunity to say that in this area, we agree with the planning board. In this area, we would like to see something different. We think these are the pros and the cons, but of course, we will defer to the will of the town. It is a meeting, and it's a full meeting of everyone involved: the planning board, the property owner, the abutters, and the rest of the town. And we just think it's time that we have 10 minutes or so to present, if you will, our perception of where we are in the process.
Madam Chair, if I may render my thoughts to you. I would promote it as a dialogue, that the seminary would be part of the dialogue, but not in the position of presenting a formal presentation. So I think that, and the key would be to make sure everybody's had a chance to speak, and if there's extra time, people can speak multiple times, but not until everybody's had the chance to speak. And I think that the seminary should be given that same opportunity as the public. So, and then in a subsequent meeting, there could be formal presentations. So
Right, I think it would be valuable to hear actually that there is a dichotomy, because there is, and it's important for the public to see that dynamic tension. So if you can keep it to 5 minutes and the comments are, targeted and specific, that would be most helpful. It would help inform the discussion, but a 10-minute presentation, I think, is probably would not fit within the time frame and probably not appropriate.
Right.
If that's the
agree,
case,
because
I think, thank you, Rick. I think I'll defer to Jonathan's suggestion.
Right
Thank you.
now, Dr. Barnes, I want to assure you that the illustrative plans are not mandatory. You
We
have
understand
to-
that.
You have to understand that. There
We do
is-
understand that.
There is
And I'll
as-
defer to Jonathan's suggestion.
Right, but there is as-of-right development on this site with respect to the dormitories, and there is the option for an approach that the planning board has not even thought of. So we are trying to accommodate a lot of divergent interests, and we're doing it in the best way we know how, particularly because of the number of unknowns and the fact that the development agreement, which we really don't have time to speak about, it is not, it doesn't appear to me that it's as far along, say, as our draft overlay district. It appears to still be relatively circumscribed in what it's attempting to address. And I can only reiterate my reference to the Collins Center materials that really, I think, would be most helpful if everyone who's negotiating the development agreement took a look at that again. So with that,
Sorry,
Just
do we know?
One last comment.
I was going to add, I mean, Ken made a comment about there's points in which they're not in alignment
Yeah.
with our,
Right.
do we know what they are? Are they
No, that's what I was going to say. that
defined and outlined?
The,
Got the points of divergence?
yeah, I was just going to say that the subject matter, just to be clear, is not is not going to be the overlay district code that's being drafted, because that's not finished or finalized or anything approved about it. But from what I'm gathering is that there's some observations or some inconsistencies perhaps that you see with the direction of the planning board in terms of their analysis of the property in the absence of any information from a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Emil. We will send to the planning board sort of bullet points on where we think there's divergence. We will send it to you well before the meeting on June 6th.
Yeah.
And again, it's so that everybody can see that this is a conversation, to use Jonathan's term, and a term that I've used from the beginning. It's not a negotiation, it's a conversation.
right. Okay.
We want to find a solution that works for everybody. So,
Okay.
thank you.
thank you, Dr. Barnes, and please, you're welcome to speak on June 6th. There's not, do not interpret the remarks of the planning board to exclude you in any way. It's just, we don't believe it's the appropriate time for a presentation. So, as a final matter, I did send around the meeting dates that we have before a fall town meeting, and I've assumed that meeting would take place at the very end of October or ideally the beginning of November. So does everyone have a copy of that?
Not in front of me. Was it included in the agenda?
It's in the packet.
It's in the packet, I think.
A moment of your.
I don't think it is.
No?
I don't think it's in the packet.
Board meeting date, right before the
It's sort of buried.
zoning districts table.
Oh, it is?
It's the page before the zoning district, the colorful tables.
Oh, the dark.
It's buried in the middle.
Oh, yeah.
Starts with
Sorry.
6.6, public input.
Go.
Don't have to worry about the stormwater management regulations. So this is our agenda. And I think that if we work hard at our meetings and are focused, we can get it done. It's in the packet.
Okay.
You just have to search for it.
Should be right before this.
Do we need to make a motion to approve these dates?
No, 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 no. I just gave it to you for your edification. But with respect to the draft overlay district that's on the table, I beseech you
Uh-oh.
to send me
I just look at
your
this.
red line versions. Or if you don't want to go so far as a red line version, just comments. Specifically focusing on what I may have omitted, what you would want to see excluded, and then you will see that there are many instances where there's to be determined. We have to look over our use table again and confirm that this is what we want. For example, I know that if you find Table 2, Emil did a consolidated version of what we discussed. So for the Browns Hill Commercial Residential, we have a space for 1 and 2 family houses. So if we have an illustrative plan for 55-plus housing, we would put an SP1 there. And similarly, there seems to be a bit of an inconsistency with the central residential commercial, where we have SP1 for a multitude of housing types, but that should have an asterisk because that would be with respect to the illustrative plans. Thank you. So those are the clarifications with respect to that use table. But that's something we can confirm at a later meeting. But we have a lot of work to do, but it starts with everybody going through this revision 8 with a fine-tooth comb. It would be most helpful.
And comments go to Patrick.
And comments go to
there it is.
Patrick.
Okay.
I mean, we can't make progress, really, if members don't dig deep into this.
Well, just so, from my perspective, I read it and I said, well, this all looks great as a framework, but when I really dig in, it's gonna be the special permit light, special permit, more detailed,
Well,
and
and that's Emil's revised table 2. It's in your package, it
Okay.
should be.
Yeah, I'll amend this allowable uses chart to put the asterisk in there for those that,
Oh,
Are relevant
I
too.
didn't mean applying the SB1 or SB2, although that is important and I'll check it. I mean the text.
Oh, yes,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
so yes, please, and the text is in there. So even on the first page of the revision 8, I have encouraged the use of illustrative plans.
No, I get it. No, I'm.
You're looking for the design metrics?
Well,
The numbers?
design metrics, and then when we get down to the nitty-gritty, what is an SP1 and what is an SP2?
Well,
Yeah.
that's all laid out in, I'll tell you, hold on.
So there is no as of right
Yes, there is, for
On
the
the-
dormitories.
on the upper
No.
campus, I was
You
going
were
to
gonna
say.
tell me?
So repurposing those buildings is at least an SP1 or an SP2? Actually, it's an SP2.
Page?
9.6.12.1 and 9.6.12.2. Those are the, I actually should call these findings, but those would be the findings, the different findings with respect to SP1 and SP2.
12 and,
At page 13.
oh, thank you. Okay, that's the applications. That tells me what the process is.
So look on page 1, purpose,
Yeah,
item 6.
Yeah, no, I saw that. Well,
But it references now in red
yep, okay.
what it says, you're deemed to have satisfied section 9.6.7.5.
Okay, so I'll need to go through each of one of those and cross-reference and understand what it is they're,
Yes, and so you're presumed to have satisfied certain of the other findings.
Okay.
Presumed, because we have to,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
this is the traffic study, the stormwater management, all these kinds of things that just don't exist, but we're going to presume that it's all okay.
Got it. So, I'll read that more detail. Whew.
Yes, and so maybe we should set a deadline for when you get those comments or red line versions to Patrick. What does everyone think about a deadline?
When's Patrick back from vacation?
Yeah, he's gone. He's gone through the 6th,
Yeah.
more like the 11th, something like that.
Yep.
I admit to being on vacation, so in a sense, there's not, you know, a huge hurry.
Yeah.
But, because I won't be able to process them once I
Right.
get them from Patrick. So I think on the 27th, our agenda should be maybe evaluating the tables. We'll have to think about a good agenda.
Well, can we just ask people come prepared with their comments?
Actually, what I was thinking is if everybody gets their version to Patrick by, I don't have a calendar in front of me, but the 26th is a Monday, what would that Thursday be?
Wait a minute, Thursday is, yeah, I'm not here.
June.
I will be on vacation, but I'll get them to him before, you know,
What's the Thursday before the 27th?
22nd.
June 22nd
Yep.
at 4 o'clock or thereabouts.
End of business day.
Right. Can everybody do that?
Oh, I'll get mine much sooner.
Right. No, but what I was thinking is if we do that, then we can, then Patrick can make copies of everyone's red line version or their comments, whatever way they want to do it. And then we can go around like we did with the 133 Essex, and each board member can propose their changes and we can agree or disagree. I don't think we necessarily have to vote at this juncture. It's not the same type of process, but we can agree or disagree whether that's an appropriate change.
Yeah, that's
And,
fine.
and that's the discussion, and then once that happens, if I have all those iterations, I can then put them all together and come up with revision 9. Any comment or discussion about that?
Yeah. Sounds
Okay.
That sounds good. I think what'll tend to happen is, once the design metrics and design standards get incorporated in table form, and once the illustrative plan is narrowed down, it will tend to re-inform the draft overlay bylaw,
Yeah,
and there'll be another
yeah.
round of that?
Really becomes,
Right. So this is the framework that then it all hangs on, but then there'll be another cycle of that process that'll include dotting i's and crossing t's in here.
engender some lively discussion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, and the way this is also set up, and I you know, looked at other town bylaws in doing this, but there's a, you know, the section for development standards 9.6.8. That has a number of standards in it, but there are more to be added. So I put them in red. Additional standards may be added, including height, setbacks, energy conservation. You know, there are a lot of things that can be added to that. And certainly, whatever language I've used can be changed. I mean, in one of the findings, for example, I have the application utilizing the illustrative plans, but I put it in both. Demonstrate incorporation of energy-saving and environmentally friendly building techniques. That language can be completely changed around, but I threw that in there because, as you said, we want to consider that in this development. And I think one of the answers to the questionnaires was Hamilton has voted or done something to go to zero carbon in 2040.
Well, that was a non-binding.
I know, but, you know, but still,
Yeah.
the planet's like,
Be
whatever.
dead by then, so.
I will be too. On that cheery note,
You want to make a motion?
yes, make a motion. Somebody make a motion to terminate this.
Bill?
Madam Chairman, I make a motion that we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I want to amend that emotion.
To make it more dogmatic? When I call your name, Pat Norton,
Aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Porter, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Rick Mitchell, and Marnie